Today we're talking with Mike from Entrust. Hey, Mike.
Hi there.
Good. Thanks for joining us. Can you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Again, Mike Ciarochi. I work for Entrust. I've been working in encryption, and Entrust does a lot of encryption, but I've been working in encryption. I used to work for PGP Corporation. A lot of people remember them from back in the day.
Yes,
And prior to that, I worked for Cisco as a network engineer. So I've been around the block a little bit with networks and protecting data.
Okay, so what's your current role?
My current role is a technical sales consultant, which is a fancy way of saying I'm a sales engineer.
Great. All right, so this is going to get pretty technical. Kirk loves to get technical here.
There you
so
go.
I will step back and let you guys geek out for a little bit.
Okay.
And you can talk way over my head.
There we go. So let's start really basic. A lot of people hear a lot about encryption.
Yep.
They say, hey, I'm encrypting my data. Does that mean I'm covered? Am I safe because I got my data encrypted?
Well, yes, encryption is very good, and these days encryption is so good that it's essentially impossible to crack it, or it's not practical. Let me put it that way. However, it doesn't mean that your data is safe, because how do you decrypt the data? You decrypt the data with keys. So your data is only as safe as the key itself, and if somebody gets your keys, they've got your data.
This kind of reminds me of the theme of ransomware, where you have to buy your keys.
Precisely, yes, and yeah.
So in that case, you'd be looking for your key, obviously, but this is a bigger issue in enterprises, is keeping track of that.
Right, it is. Most encryption today, and it's kind of interesting where we work because our job is to protect keys, primarily the division Data Protection Solutions within Entrust. And we protect data, primarily protecting the keys. And so the keys themselves, when you encrypt something, you need to decrypt it and you need to get to those keys, right? And a lot of times we get customers that come to us and we say, why are you here? And they say, well, we had an audit. I love to hear those words. and the auditor says, how are you protecting your keys? And the customer response to that is usually what keys, right?
Okay.
So what'll happen is, like for instance, if you use the Microsoft Crypto API to encrypt something, Microsoft PKI is one of those things. You issue certificates. It generates a key. You have a private key. Where does it put the key? It puts the key in the registry, right?
Nice.
So that is essentially like locking your front door and putting the key under the mat.
Right.
Because everybody knows where the key is. And so that's where we come in, is to protect that key a little more than just putting it in the same old place all the time.
Okay. So then is that offline storage of the keys then, or is that online?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So we build what NIST, standards and technology, what they refer to as a hardware cryptographic module.
Okay.
We call them hardware security modules.
Yep.
So these are hardened devices, and they're hardened against both physical and logical tampering.
Okay.
And essentially what will happen is if they detect a tamper, we call it a tamper, if they detect tamper, it just wipes itself out. There's little batteries and things there on the boards, and I can't get into too much detail. But if you attempt to tamper one of these devices, it'll kill itself. And so you can't get the keys.
So what
out
happens
of
to
that.
my key then if somebody tampers with my
That's
device?
a whole nother discussion, but it's actually more secure and more recoverable than it would be in your typical registry storage.
All right.
Right? So it is very safe, and it's very secure, and it's secure from both malicious use and secure from loss as well.
This sounds like a functionality that could be centralized, and maybe someone that really was good at managing keys in the cloud or something? Or is that
Sure.
where this is headed?
We actually have a cloud service that does that, and
Okay.
it's kind of interesting because people go, "Oh, you have a virtual hardware device," and it's like, not quite.
Right.
It's available in the cloud, but it's actually a piece of hardware. It's still the same piece of level 3 certified hardware, hardened device sitting in, it's just in our data center, not in yours. It's cloud adjacent, So you can get to it from your on-premise servers, you can get it from your cloud services, whichever cloud you're using, you can get to the hardware that way.
And then there's keys and there's master keys. And how does that work in an enterprise? Like if you have a key based on like your domain name and all that, how does this all tie together into the big picture?
Sure. So when you go to the way certificate, I'm going to give you a real thumbnail sketch of how
This is great.
certificates
Yep.
work. So you have basically symmetric and asymmetric encryption. Symmetric encryption is very fast, very, very secure.
Yep.
But you need to have the key that I'm using
Right.
because symmetric means I encrypt, you use the same key to decrypt.
Right.
And it's very fast, very secure, as I said. But the problem is, how do I get the key to you,
Right.
right?
Right.
So in 1977, three guys with the initials RSA got together and invented asymmetric encryption, where you have a public and a private portion of the key. And if you encrypt with one key, let's say you encrypt with the private key, then it can only be decrypted with the public key.
Okay.
So it's a one-way cipher.
Yep.
And you can encrypt with the public key, and it can only be decrypted with the private key. Yeah, so when you go to your bank, they present a certificate, you get that little green padlock, yes,
Yeah.
that's a good thing to get, right? And well, how do you get that? Well, you get that because they send you, in the certificate, your browser looks and it sees the public key. So it sends back to your bank a handshake, and it's encrypted to the public key.
Okay.
So what it is who can decrypt that? Only whoever is holding the private key,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
So now your bank has the private key. It can decrypt, right,
Yep.
the handshake that your browser sent. And if it responds correctly to your browser, you get the little green padlock and says, yes, that's your bank. And so that's how two totally unknown people can develop a secure relationship. And then what they do is over that secure relationship, you exchange, the browser generates a symmetric key because we want to go fast, right? And sends it back over that asymmetric encryption. And now we have a secure connection with a symmetric key that goes very fast.
Very elegant, quick lesson on
Yeah.
reminding how that all
So-
works. That
Yeah,
really
and so
is-
it's kind of complicated, the little
Right.
handshake that's going on there, but it's also very, very secure. As long as, and this is important, that bank has that private key in a very secure place, like a
Yep.
hardware security module.
Okay.
And I guarantee you they do. I mean, a lot of banks are our customers,
Sure.
so I have a.
So then, how do they keep it secure yet access it to decrypt data? So how does that all work?
The hardware security module actually does the cryptography. So what it'll do is when it gets a cryptogram from your browser, it chucks the whole thing over to the hardware security module using where the private key is loaded, and it says, decrypt this, please.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
and it does, and it sends back the answer.
Oh, wow.
And usually that handshake is the symmetric key. So what it does is it responds. It takes it, unwraps it
Yep.
with the private key, then rewraps it with the key inside,
Okay.
and sends it back to the bank's browser or the website, and it sends it back to your browser. And now your browser says, yes, that's the key I sent.
So is authentications per second or something like that important when you get to these types of modules?
Sure, big
Yeah.
web servers. Our machines can do tens of thousands of transactions per second,
Okay.
like that, little decrypts
So
like
in
that.
this model then, if I'm running a website in Amazon, I can just fire it off to your cloud to do authentication? Is
Right.
that- okay.
And then you can balance it out. You can have many HSMs, many web servers, and they're all interconnected. And if one goes away, the others fill the void.
Right, oh, exactly. All the
It
load
works
bal-
really
okay,
well.
all the intelligence at the application layer to handle
Yes.
challenges, yeah.
Well, the weak point there would be the application. You have to have your.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
Sometimes.
Right,
Sometimes
exactly.
the applications just give up and die. It's like, I can't help you there.
Right, that's another company's problem.
Right, that is-
There's other people that
it
deal
is.
with that,
You're right.
availability of the application. So I was talking, we had one of our speakers yesterday, he's writing a book on crypto.
Oh, there you go.
Roger Rhymes, and he's mentioning that on quantum actually, people aren't worried about it yet, but it's actually coming out in the next 2 years pretty where it can start becoming mainstream. And so
Yes.
that has an impact, if I understand, on the current
It does.
strength of cryptology. So is there something people need to start putting on their roadmap to deal with this in the next few years?
Sure. So quantum is still kind of a fairy tale. I mean, it's a pretty solid fairy tale. But
Right.
right now, we're actually dealing with the theory.
Okay,
So we're talking about quantum resistant encryption.
right.
And so, for instance, the symmetric encryption that I talked to you about is actually already quantum resistant.
Okay.
What concerns people is the asymmetric
The
encryption.
initial.
Because it is not as secure, you need much larger keys. But that's where the quantum computing can load up keys that'll crack RSA type encryption very quickly. So there are, because we know the theory behind quantum computing and how it would crack those keys, there are a number of algorithms out there that will replace the existing algorithms that you're using. Right now, NIST is evaluating 3 candidates for the NIST recommended quantum resistant computing or quantum resistant encryption. And we have that available, and right now we can give you basically a software version of that will run inside the HSM, so you can test it out if you want to.
Okay.
But it's since we don't know what's
Oh,
really going to be required, we don't really want to burn it into our chipset at the moment. So it's not accelerated. It's still pretty slow.
so for people listening here, what are the common challenges that happen over time to keys? How they get disorientated or lost, or what are your common, when you get called in, what are the common challenges that got them to where they were, if they get in a pickle or if they're not proactively handling this?
It's actually really dumb stuff. People forget, the keys and the keys and the HSMs are secured with tokens of some sort, smart cards or smart PEDs is what they call them. That's a competitor of ours. We don't use those, but they're there. And those have passphrases associated with them. And the most common thing is they either lose the token
Okay.
or somebody gets a new job and leaves the company with the token. And usually they have a 3 of 5 or 5 of 12 type of quorum,
Okay,
right?
to get in? Okay.
And the quorum gets eroded over a period of time. And we had one customer that was just in a dead panic because they couldn't find a quorum
Wow.
of their cards. And to actually do administrative, they had a hardware failure, and they needed a quorum in order to bring a new piece of hardware online. And they had to wait for some guy to get back from vacation. It's like, do you have your card? And he's like, yeah. Oh, good. But they had a week of sweat and bullets.
Wow.
But that kind of thing does happen.
Well, there's definitely in big companies, I can imagine, with
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
different organizations that need keys.
So the care of those tokens that are used, and they're always multi-factor, multi-person, because really it's the keys to the kingdom.
Right.
Those cards, and we recommend that, of course, that you keep track of those. You do a quarterly review, make sure everybody remembers their passphrases. But after a few years, people, it's like everybody else. You sort of forget to do the maintenance.
Sure.
I need to mow my lawn, for instance. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So are these actually cards that they actually take possession of them? Mm-hmm. Wow, that seems like
There's all sorts of things you can do.
right.
Sometimes they put them in escrow.
Okay.
So they'll be able to assemble a quorum by legal firm
Okay.
or partner firms.
Okay.
Sometimes they have hired us to
Okay.
hold their card.
Okay.
I don't think we do that anymore, but we did it, a couple of times. I've been to key ceremonies where I brought our company's card and
So they could.
to make a quorum. So
Wow. So what if we had to say, where do you see the whole key world headed, and what would you be planning for if you're an architect? Anything, big changes coming, to challenges, or anything that you anticipate?
the penetration of hardware security modules into daily life for most customers is encouraging to us because we sell those things,
Mm-hmm.
right? But more and more people are becoming aware of that.
Right.
More and more auditors, like I said, are saying, how are you protecting your keys,
Right.
right? And so I see that as happening. I see more and more people using hardware security modules and also using a hardware security module that's in a cloudy way. Like I said, it's always a piece of hardware, but it's available to the cloud. It's cloud adjacent, and we're doing that now, and we have some very big plans in the near future.
Great.
So, Mike, just to wrap this up, I got a question for you. Since you're a technical person
Yep.
supporting the frontline sales organization,
Yes.
so I know what salespeople are like. I was one of them in my previous life. And sometimes we lob over unique situations for you to solve.
Oh, absolutely.
So what's the most common thing that you see in your position where you're being brought in at the front line?
Usually architecture. So if you stop and think about all of the different things that utilize encryption, we mentioned certificates earlier, privileged access management, identity and access management, secrets management, federation services, all these things use crypto in one way or another, database encryption, right? And then you've got transparent database encryption, and you've got cell-based encryption and column-based encryption. All those use different things. So I'll be brought in to develop an architecture of how we're going to integrate that particular application with the hardware security modules. And hardware security modules these days are network resources, so I can support the PKI, I can attach the database, right? I can attach the PAM or the secrets management. We can integrate all of those with the same HSM. And so in a lot of cases, it's like, how do we do that? And so that's where I come in. Here's how you do it. And sometimes it's training. Sometimes, like here, it's to give a little talk on Crypto 101.
Right.
And, but,
Great, Mike. Well, I appreciate you coming on IT Trendsetters today. Thank you.
well, thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Good job. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
That was good stuff.